I didn't know a single BMW could choke an entire family's life until the morning I stepped outside and saw Karen Rothschild's pristine white X7 sprawled across my driveway like she was staking a military claim on my property. 47 straight days. 47 mornings of staring at a $120,000 blockade parked 6 inches from my garage, while Karen smirked from her bay window like a suburban tyrant taking attendance. The engine's cold arrogance, the smug tilt of her mirrors, the way her headlights pointed directly at my front door, it all radiated one message. You have no power here. And, for a moment, I believed her. I believed it when my mother tried to leave for her cardiology appointment and couldn't. I believed it when the medical transport driver refused to return because Karen screamed at him for trespassing on HOA territory. I believed it when Karen strutted outside with her clipboard, sunglasses, and entitlement thicker than concrete, pretending her blockade was part of some ongoing infrastructure evaluation. But belief turns to fury fast when someone endangers your family. And to be clear, this wasn't a parking inconvenience. This was intentional, strategic, suffocating trespass. Home invasion energy disguised as suburban order. But that's not even the half of it. Before we move forward, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from right now. Because what Karen did next turned my driveway into a war zone, and what I did in return turned her life into rubble. The first time her BMW blocked the driveway, I knocked on her door like a reasonable man. She opened it with a smile carved out of arrogance and jasmine perfume, holding a latte like royalty, entertaining peasants. It's temporary, she said, waving at her luxury barricade as if it were a seasonal decoration. I'm having my driveway resurfaced. Proper homeowners care about appearances. I asked how long. She shrugged. A few days, maybe more. Depends on the drying process. You'll adapt. Not sorry. Not let me adjust. Adapt. Like my mother's failing heart could adapt. Like my daughter's school schedule could adapt. Like my family was supposed to reorganize our entire existence around her $120,000 ego. Here's where everything blew apart. Day 4, my mother, trembling from chest pressure, tried to walk down the street toward the main road to meet an Uber because Karen's blockade left no other option. She made it 30 yards before her legs buckled. I carried her back up the driveway past Karen's smug BMW, feeling every ounce of fury solidify into something dangerous. Karen opened her blinds and sipped her latte. She saw everything. She didn't care. She didn't even blink. That was the moment the violation became personal. That was the moment my fury stopped simmering and started tightening like a wire about to snap. For the next week, Karen turned my driveway into a stage. She stood by her BMW with a clipboard every morning, pretending to run compliance checks, pointing at imaginary hazards while glancing at my windows to make sure I saw her performance. Her heels clicked across the asphalt like a countdown, each step saying, "Your land, my rules." And everyone in the neighborhood accepted it because they were scared of her. Scared of her HOA mafia. Scared of her surveillance habits. Scared of her ability to fabricate violations out of thin air. But fear works only when no one fights back. And I stopped being afraid the moment I realized something Karen had never bothered to consider. The driveway she occupied wasn't shared HOA access. It wasn't communal space. It wasn't subject to her fake regulations or her homemade compliance fantasies. Every square inch belonged to me. Karen wasn't asserting authority. She was trespassing. She was staging a 47-day invasion on property she didn't own, and she had no idea. Day 10, she escalated the humiliation. I tried backing my vehicle out sideways, an impossible maneuver unless you're driving a motorcycle or a miracle, and Karen watched with that predatory smile she wore like expensive jewelry. She cracked her window and said, "Careful. Any contact with my BMW becomes a liability issue. For you." Violation turned into threat. Threat turned into escalation. Escalation turned into pure HOA terrorism. And I wasn't playing defense anymore. This was war. I began documenting everything, every morning, every night. Photos, videos, angles, measurements, license plates, time-stamped evidence of her blockade choking access to my property. Evidence of her trespassing. Evidence of her obstructing medical care. Evidence powerful enough to snap her fake authority in half. But Karen didn't stop. Day 14, she added Bradford's Mercedes to the blockade, creating a luxury car wall across my driveway like she was sealing off a crime scene. She even placed orange cones around them, pretending the blockade was an authorized work zone. Watching her position those cones with theatrical precision made my jaw tighten. She didn't think she was bullying me. She thought she was untouchable. She thought her HOA crown made her invincible. She thought her BMW was a weapon I couldn't fight. She thought wrong. Because every day she parked, she gave me another violation. Every cone she placed was another offense. Every fake explanation she gave became another legal nail. But what pushed me over the edge wasn't the blocked driveway. It wasn't the harassment. It wasn't the trespassing. It was my mother's face. Pale, exhausted, afraid, when she whispered, "I don't want to cause trouble. Maybe we should work around her." And in that moment, something inside me locked into place. Calm, controlled, dangerous. No more adapting. No more negotiating. No more letting Karen's HOA cult dictate the rules. I would take everything she weaponized against me and turn it into the blade that sliced her authority to shreds. But that's not even the half of it, because on day 17, the universe handed me the exact proof I needed to destroy her. And Karen never saw it coming. Not one bit. I didn't choose this neighborhood because it was beautiful. I chose it because my aunt left me the house in her will. A quiet two-story ranch at the end of Willowbrook Estates that finally gave my daughter Zoe her own room, and my 78-year-old mother a place where she could breathe without climbing apartment stairs. The deed was clean, the boundaries clear, and the property lines ironclad. Details my electrician brain always double-checks. But I didn't realize then that this house didn't just come with walls. It came with a battlefield. And Karen was already preparing her weapons. When we first moved in, I thought the silence was peace. Fresh paint, new carpet. My daughter laughing as she hung posters in a room she could actually call hers. My mother placing her pill organizer beside her bed like it was the first time she felt safe in months. I made promises to both of them that night. Stability, security, a home. I didn't know a power-drunk HOA president was about to turn that promise into a war. I've spent more than 20 years as a licensed electrician. My entire career revolves around codes, schematics, safety compliance, and systems that only work when every detail is exact. It taught me something Karen never understood. Power means nothing unless it follows rules. And she hadn't followed a rule in years. The first time I met her, she walked across the driveway wearing heels sharp enough to puncture asphalt. She didn't introduce herself like a neighbor. She announced herself. "I'm Karen Rothschild, HOA president." She said it like royalty, declaring ownership over everything the sun touched. She corrected me twice about recycling bin placement. She corrected Zoe for hanging lights in her window. She corrected my mother for walking too slowly up the driveway, as though she was disrupting the community flow. The first time I met her, she walked across the driveway wearing heels sharp enough to puncture asphalt. She didn't introduce herself like a neighbor. She announced herself. "I'm Karen Rothschild, HOA president." She said it like royalty, declaring ownership over everything the sun touched. She corrected me twice about recycling bin placement. She corrected Zoe for hanging lights in her window. She corrected my mother for walking too slowly up the driveway, as though she was disrupting the community flow. Everything money. She measured grass height with rulers. She lectured grown adults about aesthetic harmony. And everyone accepted it because fighting her meant months of fabricated violations, late-night intimidation, and constant HOA harassment. Still, I watched, listened, learned. I realized quickly that Karen didn't enforce rules. She enforced obedience. She controlled people with shame and paperwork. She inflated her authority with theater and intimidation. She built an entire cult of silence by convincing the neighborhood that she was the sole guardian of property values. And the sad part? Most people believed her. But I grew up in a family where problems only had power when you pretended they weren't there. My mother raised me to solve issues, not tolerate them. She taught me that bullies crumble the second someone refuses to bow. But even she didn't know how far Karen was willing to go. My daughter felt it first. Zoe stopped inviting friends over because she didn't want anyone to see Karen glaring at her from the sidewalk like she was evaluating her worth. She once whispered, "Dad, everyone says she always finds something." I didn't want to believe it, but the neighborhood was full of stories. Families who left overnight, homeowners who spent thousands on nonsensical corrections, neighbors who lived under constant surveillance because Karen took issue with their lawn chairs, or their holiday lights, or their fence color, or their pets. Anything she could twist into non-compliance, she did. And not a single person had stood up to her. Not one. But the first real crack in her throne didn't come from her bullying or her theatrics. It came from something far simpler. The legal documents she never bothered to read. The original easement agreement from 1987. The property map my aunt kept in a fireproof folder. The municipal registration showing exactly where my land began and ended. Karen had been so busy inventing rules, she forgot the real ones could crush her. I found that folder on our second week in the house while unpacking. I almost tossed it aside until I saw the words Access Drive Private Ownership stamped in block letters. My heartbeat slowed, my breath steadied. I read every page with the precision of someone who's wired thousands of circuit breakers. And when I finished, I said a sentence that would shape the rest of the war. She has no idea what she's messing with. Because while Karen was busy acting like a clipboard tyrant, every technical detail, every boundary line, every clause in that easement was a legal blade pointed directly at her. And she parked her entire BMW empire right on top of it. But even then, even with the documents in hand, I didn't strike first. I waited. I watched. I learned her patterns, her surveillance routes, her fake inspections, her authority delusions. Everything she thought gave her power was built on sand. And every day, she made the same mistake. She underestimated the quiet guy who read codes for a living. But the moment I realized how deep her arrogance ran wasn't when she blocked the driveway or when she harassed my family. It was when she stood across her lawn with that predator's smile, watching us move in like she was assessing whether we met her HOA purity standards. I felt something cold settle in my chest, a promise, a warning. Karen thought this neighborhood belonged to her. She thought everyone who lived here was beneath her rules. She thought power came from intimidation. She thought she could break my family the same way she broke everyone else. But she made one catastrophic mistake. She targeted someone who actually reads every line. Someone who documents everything. Someone who doesn't blink when a bully flexes. Someone who doesn't surrender territory. Ever. I didn't know then that she was preparing her first attack. And I didn't know that her BMW would become the weapon she used to try to control me. But I also didn't know that her BMW would become the reason her entire HOA empire collapsed. That part was coming. And when it came, it hit her harder than she ever imagined. I didn't understand the full scale of Karen's control until I walked into my first HOA meeting, expecting a simple neighborhood check-in, and instead witnessed a suburban dictatorship disguised as community governance. That part was coming. And when it came, it hit her harder than she ever imagined. I didn't understand the full scale of Karen's control until I walked into my first HOA meeting, expecting a simple neighborhood check-in, and instead witnessed a suburban dictatorship disguised as community governance. The moment I stepped through the community center doors, I saw her seated at the head of the table like a monarch, presiding over trembling subjects. 4 board members sat. The moment I stepped through the community center doors, I saw her seated at the head of the table like a monarch, presiding over trembling subjects. 4 board members sat around her with their eyes lowered, nodding before she even finished her sentences. She didn't run meetings. She conducted them. Sharp nods. Sat around her with their eyes lowered, nodding before she even finished her sentences. She didn't run meetings. She conducted them. Sharp nods. Sharper interruptions. Pages of policy summaries she generated herself. Every motion passed instantly. Every question smothered. Every objection steamrolled under sharper interruptions. Pages of policy summaries she generated herself. Every motion passed instantly. Every question smothered. Every objection steamrolled under her fake authority tone. And it was in that moment I realized I wasn't dealing with a difficult neighbor. I was dealing with a clipboard parasite who built an entire community around obedience. I watched her wave around bylaws she clearly hadn't read, twisting vague clauses into absolute rules, each one tailored to reinforce her grip. And as I sat quietly at her fake authority tone, and it was in that moment I realized I wasn't dealing with a difficult neighbor. I was dealing with a clipboard parasite who built an entire community around obedience. I watched her wave around bylaws she clearly hadn't read, twisting vague clauses into absolute rules, each one tailored to reinforce her grip. And as I sat quietly at the back of the room, her voice echoed through the fluorescent-lit hall, like the sermon of a cult leader who believed she owned every driveway, every lawn edge, her personal letterhead. She issued aesthetic evaluations based on rules she made up. She mailed urgent property warnings that didn't exist anywhere in the official HOA documents. She spent her mornings pacing the streets like a wannabe cop, phone camera out, photographing anything that moved, anything that stood, anything that dared to exist outside her control. And still, people apologized to her. People thanked her. People feared her. Because she convinced everyone that non-compliance meant chaos. But all she ever protected was her ego. And my family became her next target. The first violation she fabricated against me wasn't about my driveway. It wasn't about my siding. It wasn't even about my lawn. It was my recycling bin, visible for exactly 3 minutes while I opened the lid to toss in packing paper. 3 minutes. That was enough for her to snap a photo, print a notice, and tape it to my mailbox with the theatrical confidence of a self-appointed law enforcer. Community standard violation, it read. Except the standard she cited applied only to corner lots. My house wasn't one. I read the bylaws twice to be sure. Karen hadn't made a mistake. She never made mistakes. She created them. The next week, my daughter came home shaken. Karen had approached her on the sidewalk and lectured her about hanging non-approved decorative lighting. Zoe was 17. She wasn't building a nightclub. She hung a string of lights in her window. But the way Karen towered over her, clipboard tucked like a weapon, voice dripping with superiority, that was intentional. A reminder that even children weren't safe from her enforcement fantasies. And for the first time, I saw fear in my daughter's eyes. A quiet humiliation that made my stomach knot. Karen's power didn't come from law. It came from intimidation, and intimidation only works when no one pushes back. But I wasn't ready to push back yet. Not until I understood the battlefield. So I asked around. I listened. And the neighborhood stories poured out like confessions. 6 families had moved away because of her. 3 because of constant violations. 2 because of fabricated noise complaints. 1 because her aesthetic conformity notice required them to repaint their house twice in 6 months. Every story sounded like the same pattern. Karen found something, magnified it, weaponized it, and crushed them with paperwork until they left. And she enjoyed it. She enjoyed every minute of it. I saw it in the way she walked the block. Tall, rigid, on patrol, a surveillance creep with a superiority complex. The real shift came when I studied her actual HOA presidency, that title she flaunted like a badge of unquestionable power, that role she used to justify every trespassing stunt and intimidation move. According to the HOA's own documents, requirements she herself drafted, an HOA president could serve a maximum of 4 consecutive years without full re-election. Karen had been president for 8. 4 years beyond her legal term. 4 years of illegal enforcement. 4 years of voided authority. 4 years of fabricated power she used to terrorize an entire community. I remember sitting at my kitchen table, reading those election dates over and over, the fluorescent light humming above me like a warning. She wasn't just abusive. She wasn't just manipulative. She wasn't just entitled. She was illegitimate. Her entire reign, every violation, every threat, every humiliation was built on a foundation she had no right to stand on. The next morning she escalated again. She walked up our driveway pretending to inspect the pavement for cracks. She crouched, took photos, scribbled in her notebook, looked at me through her sunglasses with that smirk that said, "This is my territory." And I stared back at her through the kitchen window with a different message. Your time is almost up. She didn't know what I knew. She didn't know her presidency was a fraud. She didn't know her notices were invalid. She didn't know her fabricated rules had no legal spine. She didn't know her surveillance routines were documented. She didn't know her power tripped the moment she parked her BMW on land she didn't own. And she definitely didn't know that her biggest mistake wasn't the harassment. It wasn't the intimidation. It wasn't the arrogance. It was targeting the wrong family. A family that reads everything. A family that documents everything. A family that doesn't bow to fake authority. The day she blocked my driveway was the day her entire kingdom started cracking. She thought she had control. She thought she was untouchable. She thought no one would ever challenge her throne. But she didn't know I had already found the cracks in her armor. And soon, I was going to tear the whole facade down. The shift happened the moment I stopped reacting to Karen's harassment and started dissecting it. Fury cooled into focus. Outrage sharpened into calculation. And every trespassing stunt she pulled became another piece of evidence I collected with the precision of a man who's wired emergency generators in hospitals during power outages. I remember the night it began. My mother had fallen asleep in the recliner, exhausted from the stress of missed cardiology appointments. Zoe was doing homework quietly, her headphones in, pretending not to hear the tension in the house. And I sat at the kitchen table with the easement documents spread out in front of me, highlighter in one hand, pen in the other, staring at the words that changed everything. Private access drive. Full ownership. Parcel 17A. My parcel. My land. My driveway. Karen hadn't just blocked access. She had committed 47 days of continuous documented trespassing on private property she had zero claim to. And she had no clue. That discovery didn't feel satisfying. It felt inevitable, like flipping a breaker you already knew was fried. But that's where everything blew apart. I brought in Jake the next morning, firefighter, surveyor, the kind of guy who reads municipal permits like bedtime stories. He set up his laser equipment at sunrise. Beams stretching across the driveway Karen had claimed as her personal parking display. As he measured, Karen marched outside, clutching her clipboard like a life raft, sunglasses perched on her face, even though the sun barely lit the horizon. "You can't conduct unauthorized surveying on community property," she barked, trying to sound official. Jake didn't even look at her. "Ma'am, this isn't community property." Emotional escalation tightened in my chest as laser dots bounced across the asphalt, lining up exactly with the original deed map. Jake checked the readings twice, then handed me the confirmation with a grin so sharp it could have cut steel. "Marcus, this entire access drive is yours, all of it. Easement gives her permission to pass through, not to park, blockade, or claim maintenance rights. She's in violation on every possible level." Karen stepped back. Not because she understood, but because control was slipping, and she felt it. She retreated to her porch like a rattled predator pretending not to limp. But I saw it. Her first crack. And I wasn't done. That night I dug deeper. Property records, tax filings, contractor liens, HOA expenditure reports. I treated every document like a schematic, tracing power lines from Karen's fake authority back to the source of her corruption. And what I found made my jaw clench so hard it hurt. Karen had been filing tax deductions for driveway maintenance costs on my property. 8 years' worth. She claimed landscaping expenses, asphalt treatments, repair fees, none of which she had ever paid on my driveway because she didn't own a centimeter of it. Fraud. Documented. Repeated. Intentional. And every false claim was time-stamped with her signature. But it got worse. She wasn't just lying to the state. She was lying to everyone. Her fake utility project wasn't a random outburst of delusion. It was a coordinated attempt to create a fabricated paper trail that justified her tax deductions. Spray paint markings, fake hazard notices, handwritten work orders, entire fabricated logs describing non-existent infrastructure evaluations. She wasn't protecting the community. She was covering her tracks. And all of it was documented in her handwriting, with dates, times, photos, sketches, evidence she built herself. Evidence that now belonged to me. The next morning, I called the city utilities department. I emailed them every photo I had, every marking, every cone, every fake hazard line she painted across my land. Their response arrived in less than an hour. "None of the markings or work described are part of any municipal project. Someone is impersonating utility operations." That email was a detonator. It meant Karen hadn't just trespassed. She hadn't just fabricated evidence. She hadn't just abused HOA power. She had impersonated municipal authorities. That's federal territory. And she had no idea how deep she was sinking. The neighborhood became my silent ally without me even asking. Betty from across the street knocked one evening carrying cinnamon cookies and a folder thicker than a phone book. "She did this to everyone," she whispered, her voice shaking with years of pent-up frustration. Violation notices, photos Karen took without consent, notes she scribbled calling neighbors aesthetic risks, non-compliant personalities, and habitually problematic. Betty wasn't the only one. The Hendersons, the Martinezes, the Paytons, they all had files, photos, evidence. Years of intimidation trapped inside manila envelopes, evidence Karen assumed no one would ever compare. But I compared everything. I laid it all out across the kitchen table like a crime board. Dates aligned, violations overlapped. The same fabricated clauses appeared across every notice, the same intimidation patterns, the same handwriting. Karen wasn't enforcing anything. She was running an 8-year harassment operation, and the entire neighborhood had been her testing ground. The deeper I went, the more obvious the pattern became. She bullied elderly residents with medical issues. She targeted single parents. She targeted newcomers. She targeted anyone who didn't praise her authority. And the reason she had escalated so dramatically with me was simple. I didn't bow. Bullies escalate against resistance, but they implode against proof. And what I had assembled was proof with teeth. I spent that night documenting everything chronologically. Every violation, every blockade, every trespass, every fake utility marking, every tax filing I pulled, every witness account, every timestamp, every photo. It wasn't a file anymore. It was a weapon. And Karen had handed me every piece of ammunition herself. But the final blow came quietly, like flicking a switch. Jake called me at dawn. "Marcus, you're not going to believe this." His voice wasn't surprised. It was amused. "State Revenue already has her flagged. Someone else reported her months ago. They've been building a case." And suddenly it clicked. The spray paint, the frantic late-night measuring, the cones, the fabricated logs. Karen was scrambling to create proof for investigators. She wasn't enforcing rules. She was staging a cover-up. And she had parked her entire fraudulent empire on my driveway. My property, my evidence. That morning, as sunlight hit her BMW, I watched her crouch over her fake markings again, measuring imaginary hazards with the desperation of someone drowning. And I knew she had no idea she was being recorded from 3 angles. No idea she was digging her own grave. No idea the documents in my kitchen were already en route to 3 agencies. No idea her presidency was illegal. No idea her parking stunt was the trigger for her collapse. No idea the one homeowner she tried to break was the one who would dismantle her entire empire. And when I stepped away from the window, I didn't feel fear, or anger, or stress. Just calm. Controlled. Dangerous. The kind of calm right before the power grid overloads and every line snaps at once. Karen thought she had control. She thought she owned the neighborhood. She thought she owned me. She was wrong. She'd built her entire identity on a foundation of fraud, and now I had the proof to destroy her. The morning everything detonated didn't start with shouting. It started with silence. Heavy, electric, storm-coming silence. The kind that settles over a neighborhood right before something breaks. I stood at my kitchen window holding a cup of coffee that tasted like the calm before a controlled demolition, watching Karen pace in her driveway with a... The morning everything detonated didn't start with shouting. It started with silence. Heavy, electric, storm-coming silence. The kind that settles over a neighborhood right before something breaks. I stood at my kitchen window holding a cup of coffee that tasted like the calm before a controlled demolition, watching Karen pace in her driveway with her clipboard clutched against her chest like a defibrillator for her dying authority. Her sunglasses hit her eyes, but not the jitter in her movements. And I knew why. She could feel it. Predators always sense when the ground under them shifts. She just didn't know the shift was a file with her name on it, sitting inside 3 government inboxes. But that wasn't the confrontation that mattered. Not yet. The real collapse began when I finally posted the formal notice on her gate. Certified, time-stamped, loaded with survey data she couldn't twist. Remove all unauthorized vehicles and structures within 72 hours. Simple, cold, legal. She read the letter right there at her ornate front, her clipboard clutched against her chest like a defibrillator for her dying authority. Her sunglasses hit her eyes, but not the jitter in her movements. And I knew why. She could feel it. Predators always sense when the ground under them shifts. She just didn't know the shift was a file with her name on it, sitting inside 3 government inboxes. But that wasn't the confrontation that mattered. Not yet. The real collapse began when I finally posted the formal notice on her gate. Certified, time-stamped, loaded with survey data she couldn't twist. Remove all unauthorized vehicles and structures within 72 hours. Simple, cold, legal. She read the letter right there at her ornate front. The countdown had already begun. That night, she escalated. Of course she did. Abusers don't retreat. They double down. She filed a temporary restraining order claiming I was stalking her by taking photos of my own driveway. She submitted noise complaints about my work van that hadn't even moved that day. She sent fresh violation notices with bylaw numbers she invented in her head. It was desperation. Pure, sloppy desperation. And desperation makes mistakes. The court hearing the next day was supposed to be her moment. She arrived in a tailored blazer, hair perfectly arranged, posture stiff with theatrical confidence. I could almost hear her rehearsed lines echoing in her head. He threatened me. He harassed me. He sabotaged my duties. Except the judge didn't buy any of it. Not when Jake presented the survey data. Not when the city attorney confirmed her fake utility markings. Not when the restraining order petition listed photographing his own private property as evidence. 12 minutes. That's all it took for her entire accusation to evaporate. Karen left the courtroom with humiliation burning through her veneer, gripping her briefcase so tightly her knuckles turned white. But that wasn't the collapse. That was just the warm-up. Her real public destruction unfolded in front of the entire neighborhood. Thursday morning, 6:01 a.m. The 72-hour deadline struck like a hammer. I stood in my driveway with a coffee mug in hand while 2 municipal tow trucks rolled up the street, their engines humming like the opening notes of a requiem. A code enforcement van followed, then an off-duty police officer. I hired him because I knew Karen lied like she breathed, and I wanted every second documented. She burst out of her mansion wearing a designer robe tied so tightly it looked like she was holding herself together with fabric. "Stop! Stop! You can't touch my vehicles!" Her voice cracked. Not with authority, but with panic. Officer Rodriguez stepped forward with the patience of a man who had seen every flavor of suburban meltdown. "Ma'am, these cars are parked on private property without permission. They will be removed." "I'm the HOA president," she fired back, voice shrill enough to pierce glass. "I have enforcement authority." "HOA authority doesn't override property law," he replied. Karen froze, because the script she'd used for 8 years no longer worked. So she tried a new play, a desperate one, a criminal one. She reached into her robe pocket and pulled out a thick envelope of cash, crisp hundreds folded together like a bribe designed in a panic. "Marcus, listen," she said, her tone dropping to a dangerous whisper. $5,000. We can settle this. You let me use the driveway and we move past this." The neighborhood didn't breathe, not one person. They just watched from behind curtains and half-open blinds as Karen Rothschild, self-appointed queen of the cul-de-sac, attempted to bribe her way out of consequences. And she didn't realize until too late that my security cameras had caught every word. Officer Rodriguez stopped writing and stared at her. "Ma'am, did you just offer money to continue illegal activity on someone else's property?" "It's compensation," she insisted, eyes darting, voice cracking under the weight of her failing delusion. A misunderstanding. A misunderstanding that lasted 47 days? Rodriguez wrote another note. That note sealed her fate. The tow operator got to work. Precision, patience, professionalism. Karen wailed like someone watching her identity get unbolted piece by piece. Because that BMW wasn't transportation. It was her throne, her trophy, her personality. When the hydraulic arms lifted her car off the ground, the moment felt biblical. Retribution in real time. By the time the Mercedes was loaded onto the second flatbed, neighbors were gathering on sidewalks, silent, unified witnesses to the fall of their longtime tormentor. And when code enforcement dismantled her fake construction fence, strip by strip, cone by cone, it felt like watching a kingdom crumble brick by fraudulent brick. But the single moment that carved itself into neighborhood legend happened right after the trucks pulled away. Karen stood in her driveway surrounded by overturned cones and scattered paperwork, screaming, "This isn't over!" I stared at her, calm as a locked breaker. "You're right," I said. "Municipal investigation starts Monday. State audit starts Tuesday. Federal review starts Wednesday." The silence that followed wasn't quiet. It was seismic. A whole neighborhood heard it. And Karen understood finally that her power trip had ended. That she wasn't feared anymore. That she wasn't in control. That she wasn't special. She backed toward her house slowly. One step, then another. Her voice died, her body sagged, and her kingdom, built on fear, intimidation, and fraudulent authority, collapsed around her like wet cardboard. That night, word spread through the community faster than her violation notices ever did. People whispered, people celebrated quietly, people finally exhaled after years of surveillance and harassment. And as the streetlights flickered on, the neighborhood didn't feel dangerous anymore. It felt alive. Karen's reign wasn't just over. It was broadcast, documented, public, humiliating. And all that was left now was the fall. The hard fall. The permanent fall. The moment her cars disappeared around the corner, something inside me shifted. Not relief, not triumph, something colder, sharper. A tightening calm that settles into a man who knows the next phase isn't about anger anymore. It's about precision. Karen thought losing her BMW was the end. She had no idea it was the beginning of the phase I do better than anyone alive. Systematic, expert retaliation, carried out with the accuracy of a man who's spent 20 years navigating electrical codes, municipal permits, and compliance structures that terrify average people. I didn't need rage anymore. I needed documentation, timing, and execution. And by that point, I already had all three. That evening, after the tow trucks left and the neighborhood returned to a stunned quiet, I spread every file across my kitchen table the same way I'd lay out schematics for a complex electrical install. Not to admire the damage, but to map the next strike. Municipal code enforcement, state revenue, federal postal inspection, 3 agencies, 3 pressure points, 3 fail-safes. I wasn't hoping she'd collapse. I was ensuring it. And the beauty was every piece of evidence came from her own compulsive need to control everything. Her fake utility logs, her forged hazard diagrams, her illegally extended HOA presidency, her tax records falsified with deductions for maintenance on property she didn't own, her fabricated violations, her surveillance photos, her harassment patterns. She had built an entire criminal portfolio with the obsessive attention of a perfectionist who believed she'd never be caught. And now every page, every timestamp, every signature was ammunition. Jake arrived just before sunset, laptop under his arm, eyes lit with the kind of excitement men get when they know they're about to help dismantle a tyrant. "You ready?" he asked. "Past ready," I said. He connected to the city's public evidence submission portal and organized the files with the kind of precision only a firefighter-surveyor hybrid could manage. "Municipal fraud first," Jake said, labeling each folder with the dates she painted fake infrastructure lines on my driveway. "Utility impersonation next, then boundary violations, then trespass logs." Every upload hit the system with a soft, digital ping that felt like counting down to an explosion. Tom from city government joined us an hour later, bringing copies of archived HOA election records he'd pulled earlier. When he set them on the table, he exhaled slowly and said, "She's been operating under an invalid presidency for half a decade. Every enforcement decision she's made is void. Even after everything I'd uncovered, hearing it from a municipal official felt like watching a breaker box blow open. Karen's empire wasn't cracked. It was rotten. Entire sections of her authority didn't exist. She'd built her entire identity on a foundation she never legally possessed. And the moment we filed the documents proving it, the collapse became unstoppable. But retaliation wasn't just paperwork, it was timing. And I executed with the same calculated precision I used when rewiring heavy machinery under strict deadlines. At 9:12 p.m., Municipal Code Enforcement received the full utility impersonation report. At 9:17 p.m., State Revenue received the tax fraud dossier, 8 years of falsified deductions and fraudulent filings. At 9:26 p.m., the Federal Postal Inspection Service received digital copies of her fabricated work orders, mailed notices, and falsified HOA communications. 3 agencies, 3 separate jurisdictions, 3 independent investigations launched in the same hour. No escape routes, no time to regroup, no one for her to manipulate, no one for her intimidation tactics to sway. She had no idea yet. But her world had already begun to collapse in triplicate. Meanwhile, the neighborhood formed behind me like an army of witnesses who had finally found someone willing to stand in front. Betty arrived with folders organized chronologically. Mrs. Henderson brought violation notices stacked like bricks. Tom provided municipal records. Residents contributed photos, emails, recorded conversations. Stories they had been too afraid to share for years spilled out now that the fall had begun. Harassment of senior citizens, unapproved surveillance, falsified violations, selective enforcement, targeted intimidation campaigns, property manipulation attempts. The evidence became a wall of truth so high Karen couldn't climb it, couldn't argue through it, couldn't threaten her way around it. And I made sure every document was time-stamped, backed up, and delivered to investigators with a neatness that would make an auditor weep with joy. By midnight, Karen's authority existed only inside her own panic. Because expert retaliation isn't loud. It's in the details. It's in the timing. It's in the way every file aligns. It's in the precision of turning someone's abuse of power into the rope they hang themselves with. And as I shut my binder that night, I felt that voltage of calm again. Not satisfaction, not vengeance, just certainty. Certainty that she had crossed the wrong homeowner. Certainty that I wasn't done. Certainty that the next 72 hours would end the myth of Karen's power forever. Victory doesn't always arrive with noise. Sometimes it walks in quietly, like a shadow crossing a doorway, and by the time the person inside realizes it's there, it's already too late. That's how Karen's downfall finally landed. Slow, deliberate, unstoppable. The first blow struck early Tuesday morning when an unmarked sedan from the State Revenue Department rolled into the neighborhood. No sirens, no flashing lights, just two investigators in dark coats stepping out with clipboards and questions that sliced through her world like blades. I watched from my window as they approached her mansion's front door. She opened it halfway, trying to maintain her posture, but her eyes flickered with panic when they asked for Vivian Rothschild regarding 8 years of questionable tax filings connected to property at Parcel 17A. She tried to play queen again, tried to summon that fraudulent authority she'd used to terrify an entire community, but her voice cracked before she reached the second sentence. They entered her home. The door shut behind them, and the neighborhood exhaled for the first time in nearly a decade. By Wednesday, the federal postal inspector arrived, then municipal code enforcement, then a city representative delivering formal notice of HOA governance violations. Each knock at her door was a hammer hitting a structure already collapsing under its own fraud. Neighbors didn't gather to watch, not openly, but curtains shifted, garage lights flicked on, people paused their morning routines, because everyone understood they weren't witnessing harassment. They were witnessing justice. The cold kind, the deserved kind, the kind that makes abusers smaller with every question asked. The next blow didn't hit her house. It hit her marriage. Bradford packed his suitcases in plain sight. No secrecy, no shame. He loaded them into a rental car while Karen stood in the doorway begging him to support the image a little longer. But images don't protect criminals. They just decorate them. Bradford closed the trunk, wiped his face with both hands, and drove away without looking back. Then came the HOA meeting, the one nobody ever attended. Except now the room was full, not with fear, with appetite, with anticipation for the end of the regime that had turned a peaceful cul-de-sac into a surveillance camp. Karen arrived looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. Her usual armor, designer clothes, perfect hair, rehearsed authority, couldn't shield her from the fact that her empire was gone. The board had already suspended her. The residents already knew the truth. The reporter already had his notes, and I had the binder with every piece of evidence that spelled out the story of a woman who mistook power for ownership and authority for immunity. When she stood at the front of the room and attempted her final performance, attempts to undermine my governance threatened the stability of this community. Her voice didn't echo. It collapsed. And right there, under the fluorescent lights she once used to glare down at neighbors she deemed aesthetic risks, she made her fatal mistake. She opened her binder of fake utility logs, fabricated progress reports, imaginary engineering notes, and falsified diagrams. She handed them to the board as proof. It was like watching someone walk into court carrying a signed confession and pass it out like flyers. The room went still. Officer Rodriguez stepped closer. The reporter's pen froze. Every resident leaned in, and Karen, still clinging to the last threads of her delusion, said aloud, "These documents verify the infrastructure maintenance I was forced to conduct on Parcel 17A." She said it calmly, proudly, completely unaware she had just admitted to federal impersonation, municipal fraud, and 8 years of tax deception. The silence that followed wasn't quiet. It was suffocating. Then Betty, seated at the board table with the dignity of someone who no longer feared punishment, looked Karen dead in the eye and said, "You did this to yourself." That was the moment. The exact second Karen realized there was no path back, no authority to cling to, no throne left to sit on, no fear left to weaponize. Her collapse wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. She just folded. Her shoulders dropped. Her gaze lowered. Her voice cracked as she insisted she only wanted to protect property values. But no one was listening anymore. Consequences had already begun. The final blow came weeks later, the day the impound lot exercised their keeper lien. 30 days of unpaid storage fees, towing costs, administrative fines, and additional penalties stacked high enough to legally seize her BMW. Her $120K status symbol. Her identity on wheels. Sold at auction for a fraction of its worth. And I bought the receipt. Not the car. The receipt. A framed reminder in my garage of what happens when someone trespasses on my property and underestimates the wrong man. Karen moved out shortly after. No goodbye, no explanation. Just a quiet departure in a borrowed sedan with a cardboard box of paperwork that no longer meant anything. Her mansion didn't stay empty long. A young family bought it. 3 kids. A dog that runs the yard like it owns the block. A couple who baked brownies for the neighbors and asked about community guidelines with genuine kindness. I told them the truth. Be good neighbors. Everything else works itself out. And it has. Elena attends every cardiology appointment now. Zoe invites friends over without fear or embarrassment. The neighborhood, once strangled by Karen's surveillance, breathes easy. People talk again. Kids play outside. Doors stay open. And the HOA, under Betty's leadership, transformed into what it should have always been. A support system, not a weapon. But the real victory? It's not Karen losing her house, or her car, or her presidency, or her marriage. It's the silence. The silence that settles into a neighborhood after the tyrant leaves. The silence where fear used to live. The silence that hums like a transformer after a surge passes. The silence that tells you justice didn't just land, it stayed. And in that silence, standing on the driveway Karen once tried to claim, I felt the final click of the circuit. The moment everything locked into place. The moment power returned to where it always belonged. HOA went dead silent.